Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back to the Muslim Podcaster. I'm your host Majid. Today I want to talk about a war that almost nobody's talking about. Not because it's small, but rather because it doesn't fit the headlines that the West finds convenient. I'm talking about Sudan, a country being ripped apart while the world scrolls past. You know it's bad when Muslims have to compete over who's suffering the most. Gaza, Yemen, Syria, Sudan, each one bleeding, each one silenced. Now let's talk about what's really happening in Sudan. For over a year now, Sudan's been in the middle of a brutal civil war, a war between the Sudanese armed forces led by General Al-Burhan and the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, led by Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemedti. This isn't your normal power struggle. It's not just between two men fighting for a seat in Khartoum. This is a war that's tearing the country's fabric apart, ethnically, politically, economically, and it's doing it with foreign help. The latest turning point was the fall of Al-Fashir, the capital of Darfur. After months of siege, starvation, and relentless shelling, the RSF took it, and what followed was horrific. Massacres of civilians, ethnic cleansing, whole neighborhoods wiped out. This wasn't random chaos, it was methodical. Because whoever controls Darfur controls Western Sudan, and Darfur is loaded with gold, oil, and mineral wealth. 6 underground lakes, fertile land, trade routes to Libya and Chad. So when Al Fashir fell, it wasn't just a battle lost, it was Sudan's last stronghold in Darfur collapsing. Now, the RSF controls most of Western Sudan, its borders, its gold mines, its smuggling routes. They're no longer just a militia, they're a state within a state, and maybe the embryo of a breakaway regime. Now, the question is, how did a militia like that pull it off? Let's be honest, Hemedti didn't build that empire on Sudanese resources alone. According to UN reports, Amnesty International, and multiple Western papers, including The Guardian and the Wall Street Journal, the RSF's lifeline runs straight through the United Arab Emirates. That's right, the same tiny desert kingdom that loves to brand itself as a hub of peace, progress, and tolerance, is arming and bankrolling a militia accused of genocide. Planes have been tracked flying from Abu Dhabi to Chad, labeled as humanitarian aid but carrying ammunition, drones, and fuel for Hemedti's forces. Weapons brought under official UK export licenses rerouted through Dubai and then into Darfur. Even the British press, not exactly known for defending Muslim causes, have exposed it. And get this, hundreds of Colombian mercenaries have been fighting alongside the RSF, recruited through UAE contracts that were disguised as security jobs. It's Yemen all over again, the same playbook: hire foreigners, arm warlords, and call it stability. Now, why would the UAE care about Sudan? They've got no border with it, no historical tie, but they've got an agenda, and it's much bigger than Sudan. So let's talk about that agenda: the UAE's empire and its war on Islam. The UAE has built an empire, not with soldiers, but with money, ports, and proxies. They've got eyes on the Red Sea, they want control of Port Sudan, and they already dominate shipping routes through Eritrea, Somalia, and Yemen's Socotra Island. If they can install a friendly regime in Sudan, or even a divided Sudan they can manipulate, they lock down another strategic coastline. That's motive number one: geopolitical control. Motive number two is gold. The RSF's company Al Junaid exports billions in gold, mostly to Dubai. So every time Sudan bleeds, Dubai profits. The UN has estimated that much of Sudan's unrecorded gold, literally smuggled conflict gold, ends up in Emirati markets. That's blood money gleaming in the towers of Dubai. And then there's the ideology, or rather, the war on ideology. For the last decade, the UAE has crushed every movement that even smells of Islamic revival. Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Yemen, and now Sudan. Wherever Muslims try to rise up against dictators and foreign agents, the UAE shows up with cash and guns. That's the game. They call it counter-terrorism. We call it what it is, counter-Islam. And this war on Islam doesn't stop in the Middle East. The UAE has taken it global, funding the narrative as much as the warfare. Over the past decade, Abu Dhabi has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into Western think tanks, universities, and lobbying firms, especially in the United States and Europe. According to a study by the Quincy Institute, between 2020 and 2021 alone, Emirati interests paid over $64 million to lobbyists and PR firms in Washington. Those firms logged more than 10,000 political contacts in just 2 years. That's not influence, that's infiltration. And when you follow the money trail, it gets clearer. Public records show that Emirati funds have gone into respected names like the Middle East Institute, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and the Atlantic Council. All think tanks that shape how Washington views Islam, the Middle East, and so-called extremism. Even the Center for American Progress, a liberal institution, had to stop taking UAE money after public scrutiny. So whether it's right-wing or liberal, the goal's the same: to make sure every discussion about the Muslim world fits into a neat Western frame. Secular, compliant, depoliticized. It's about controlling the story, making sure that their version of Islam, the one that prays but never questions, that worships but never resists, becomes the only Islam that gets airtime. And it doesn't stop in Washington. In Europe, a cross-border investigation known as the Abu Dhabi Secrets exposed how the UAE hired a Swiss firm to run smear campaigns and disinformation operations targeting Islamic movements, scholars, and activists across France and Switzerland. They were literally paying for fake dossiers, leaked data, and media hit pieces to label Muslim voices as extremists. So when we talk about the UAE's war on Islam, we're not talking about one region. We're talking about a global strategy from Khartoum to Washington to Brussels, where oil money fuels a crusade against Islamic consciousness itself. To understand that mentality, you have to look at where this state came from. The rulers of the Emirates were never revolutionaries. They were installed. Those tiny Gulf sheikdoms were British protectorates, part of the old trucial states. When Britain withdrew in 1971, it handed power to the same compliant families, and the Americans stepped in to guarantee their thrones. So the DNA of that state is colonial obedience. Instead of British gunboats, you've got Western weapons contracts. Instead of colonial governors, PR firms and think tank partnerships. Instead of missionaries, moderate Islam conferences that skip every verse about ruling by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed. That's why whenever an Islamic movement rises anywhere, the UAE's first instinct is panic. Because real Islam, lived and implemented, is the one their entire system can't survive. After the fall of Bashir, when the Sudanese people wanted real change, the UAE and Saudi stepped in with billions to so-called stabilize the transition, code for keeping the generals in charge. They fund both sides, push the country to the brink, and then pose as mediators. Now let's zoom out, because this isn't just about Sudan, it's about the whole map. Sudan sits at the crossroads of Africa's resources and the Arab world's stability. It's the strategic heart of the Nile Basin, the bridge between the Red Sea and the Sahel. Whoever shapes Sudan shapes the region. And Sudan's collapse doesn't only serve Hemedti or the UAE, it serves Washington and Israel. So let's look at Egypt, for example. For Cairo, Sudan isn't just a neighbor, it's a buffer. It protects Egypt's southern border, its agriculture, and most importantly, the Nile. 85% of the Nile's water comes from outside Egypt, the Blue Nile from Ethiopia, the White Nile from South Sudan, and both sources are already influenced by foreign powers. Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam, the biggest in Africa, is backed by Western firms, Gulf money, and Israeli advisors. Because whoever controls the Nile controls Egypt. So if you weaken Sudan, you remove Egypt's natural shield. Then you can squeeze Cairo from two sides, from Gaza in the north and from the Nile in the south. That's not coincidence, that's strategy. And look at the timing. Gaza burns, Sinai remains under tight security restrictions, the Nile is under threat, and now Darfur falls. Step back, the whole region around Egypt is being reshaped. And behind all this, sitting quietly, calculating every move, is Israel. Now, I'm not saying Israel created this war from scratch, but you'd have to be blind not to see how perfectly it serves its interests. Israel doesn't need to drop a single bomb in Sudan. It just needs to make sure Sudan never stands tall again. A strong, united Islamic Sudan would be a threat, strategically, ideologically, even geographically. It's Egypt's southern depth, Africa's Muslim's backbone, and it sits on the Red Sea, the same Red Sea Israel has been trying to dominate through its new Gulf alliances. This isn't a conspiracy, it's policy. Israel's doctrine since the 1950s, Ben-Gurion's periphery strategy, was to ally with non-Arab or peripheral states like Ethiopia, South Sudan, even certain Kurdish movements to encircle and weaken the Arab core. It's an old playbook, still running. Look at the results. Israel now has relations with both sides of Sudan's conflict, Burhan's army and Hamedti's RSF. In 2021, Burhan met Netanyahu in Uganda to discuss normalization. When fighting broke out, Israeli diplomats offered to mediate, not out of mercy, but to stay close to whoever wins. Meanwhile, Israel has strengthened ties with Ethiopia and South Sudan, both crucial to Egypt's lifeline, the Nile. It supplies them with technology, intelligence, and military support, giving it leverage over Egypt itself. So as Sudan burns and Egypt weakens, Israel quietly gains room to maneuver from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and deep into Africa. They don't need to fire a shot. They just need to let the system that serves them, the one built by the West and maintained through their partners in Washington and Abu Dhabi, keep running. And it's running perfectly. Let's be honest, the humanitarian crisis is catastrophic, but the silence is worse. Western governments send billions to Ukraine overnight, but Sudanese children starve. Gulf media barely mentions it because their own regimes are complicit. And the so-called international community, they recycle the same empty language, peace talks, transitional councils, inclusive dialogue. They discuss everything except sovereignty and Sharia because those threaten the entire colonial order. So, where does that leave the Ummah? When you look at all this, Gaza, Yemen, Syria, Sudan, it's not coincidence, it's design. Different lands, same disease, rulers serving foreign masters, and an Ummah left bleeding. Sudan isn't a failed state, it's a mirror. It shows what happens when we trust men who fear Islam more than they fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "There will come upon the people years of treachery, when the liar will be believed and the truthful disbelieved, the treacherous trusted and the trustworthy seen as treacherous." That's our time. The treacherous are celebrated, the sincere are silenced, and the world calls that stability. If the international community truly cared about human life, it wouldn't embargo weapons on paper while shipping them through Dubai or cry over Ukraine while ignoring Al-Fashir. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, O you who believe, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to Allah, even if it be against yourselves or your parents and relatives. Justice isn't a Western slogan, it's a divine obligation. So what is the vision beyond Sudan? And let's be clear, brothers and sisters, Sudan's problem didn't start with this war, and it won't end when the guns stop. The real disaster is the system that's been ruling that land for decades, a system that copied Western politics, abandoned Sharia, and handed the country's wealth to a small elite backed by foreign hands. You can swap out generals and ministers all you like, but if the system stays the same, the oppression stays the same. That's why every so-called transition ends in betrayal, because you can't fix corruption with the very framework that created it. Sudan won't be saved by another UN roadmap or power sharing agreement. It will only rise when its people throw out these colonial systems and return to what truly gave Muslims dignity, a leadership that rules by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, not by what Washington or Abu Dhabi demands. That's what the Khilafah represented, not just a historical state, but a structure of accountability rooted in the Quran and Sunnah. A system where the ruler fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than sanctions, where the army defends the Ummah, not the throne, and where the resources of the land, its gold, its oil, its water, serve the people, not the foreign corporations. That's the standard. Not nationalism, not democracy, not military juntas dressed up as governments. Real independence starts with returning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's system. So yes, we expose the UAE, we expose Israel, and we expose the West, but we also expose the disease within, rulers who've turned their backs on the deen and chained their nations to the same colonial order that once occupied them. Only when that chain is broken, when Muslims unite under leadership that governs by Islam, will Sudan, Gaza, Yemen, and every other wounded land finally heal. So what do? Firstly, we wake up, not just emotionally but intellectually. Second, we speak. Silence is not neutral. Every voice matters. Thirdly, we stop glorifying the regimes that oppress us. You can't admire their skylines while their money fuels the killing of Muslims. And finally, we remember who's really in charge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, and say, do as you will, for Allah will see your deeds, and so will His Messenger and the believers. Nothing escapes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no massacre, no lie, no betrayal. Every act is recorded, every oppressor will stand accountable. So when we make dua for Sudan, we shouldn't just pray for peace. We should pray for justice, for leadership, and for an ummah that wakes up. Because the blood of Sudan isn't theirs alone, it's ours too. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unite the hearts of the believers, expose the hypocrites, and raise among us those who will lead with truth, courage, and mercy. Jazakallah khair for listening to the Muslim Podcaster. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.